everyone, welcome to this short video on planning a session. My name's Julia Hay. So we need to think about what we're going to plan before we go out and run a session. And what I'm going to do is take you through some of the elements that you need to have a think about when planning a session. So first of all, what's really important is that you establish some of the key information about your playing group. So the date, which obviously is going to affect the season, things like that. So the date's quite important. It also helps when you have multiple sessions that you need to plan. The time of the session, the time of the day, obviously again in the morning, it might be different to the afternoon or the evening. Things like the daylight are going to come into effect there. The length of the session, depending on how long your session is, will depend on how much you can fit in. And that helps if other people need to use your plans because they know exactly how long the training session is for. The venue, that can make a big difference to what you plan according to what resources are available at the venue. Sequence number, so that's where are you up to in the season? Is it pre-season? Is it the first session of once you started your competition, or is it the end of the season? And then it's really nice to keep your session plans too, because then you can always go back next year once you're coaching again and reflect back, and having the sequence number there allows you to organise them. The number of players, we all know that makes a big difference between if you're going to have 30 players turn up for training or 5. So it's a good idea to keep track of how many players are going to be coming to your session. And also it's really good to write down the age or the ability level depending on if you're working with juniors or seniors. So if it's seniors, they might be beginners to the sport. If it's juniors, under 8s is going to be quite different probably to an under 14 age group with what they need to focus on throughout the session. The other things that I really like to see in a session plan are a couple of aims or goals of the session. It's great to think about that when you're planning, and quite often I link my aims to the session if it's during the season back to the game that we just played. So I know if I want to work on, for example, accuracy of passing, then I'll do a drill, and so that'll become one of my aims for the session. In teaching, I like to use this way to start our aims just because it makes it really clear. It helps us fit into the SMART format. So I always start mine by saying by the end of this session, players will be able to, and for example, kick a drop punt 10 metres to a stationary target. It's really specific. Obviously, if we go through our SMART goals, I can measure it as the coach. It's attainable. We've got to make sure it's attainable for the age group. So that's a great goal for under 8s and under 9s in football. If that was for under maybe 18s, it might be a little bit too easy. Is it relevant? Obviously, you don't want to be setting goals in here that are not relevant to your sport and the game that you play. And is it time-based? So it is, because I've said by the end of this session. The other thing that's really important to write down is the equipment list that you're going to need. You don't want to turn up and on the day and you can't run one of your activities because you haven't remembered that you need poles or bibs or a certain amount of balls. So I'd always write down really specifically how much equipment you need. So don't just write balls, write how many balls you need, how many cones, and then that way you can get organised and also have some of the other parents and assistant coaches help you with that as well prior to the session starting. I've written safety and OHS there. It's not something in sport we tend to write in the session plans, but coming from an education background, we would write that in lesson plans. So I wouldn't say it has to be written into your plan, but probably just have a think about the safety and OHS if there's anything of where you're training or the way that you're going to organise your groups. It's always good to have that pre-planned. With regards to the structure of your session, there's a few different ways that you can do it, but I would always, a very basic session plan of structure looks like some type of a warm-up at the start, then you would go into your skills, and then you would have a culmination activity at the end of the session. So if I've used this example for football, so with football at the moment, what we're trying to do is get players as they arrive early. Quite often they're there 15 minutes before the scheduled time to start. That's when I would be getting them to do this high touch warm up. And what we want them to do is partner up and do lots of handballs and kicks and ground balls and marks to themselves in partners. And we're aiming for them to have 150 touches even before training started. That just gets them really ready psychologically and physically ready for the training session ahead. After that, we would go into a dynamic warm-up. So we've moved away now from doing things like send them for laps. it's not very fun, it's not very motivating, it's not going to switch on your players. What we want to start with, if they've done this high touch warm up, they're already going to be a little bit warm, so we're going to go straight into our dynamic stretches. The Prep to Play resource is a great resource to get your hands on. It's available free if you just Google Prep to Play football resource, and it's got a really large range of dynamic stretches in there. So that's things like lunge walk, hamstring sweep, grapevine, heel flicks, things like that. We know, I've written here, don't do static stretches. So we know now that sports science has evolved. So when I studied my sports science degree 25 years ago, we were always taught to do static stretches. Nowadays, we know that it's not as efficient for warming up the body. So we're really moving over to doing everything dynamic nowadays. After you've done, I've also put there include balls. I like to include balls in the dynamic stretches. So you might have a couple of coaches on the end or parent helpers once they've done a run through is handballing them a ball or throwing them a ball just to catch. It's just a good way to incorporate the football or the sports side of it with the dynamic stretches. After we do our dynamic warm-up, we would, I've put and/or because it's depending on what age group you coach. So with the junior kids I coach under 9s, I wouldn't really need to do much of a dynamic warm-up. They're young, they're pretty mobile. I would do this more with your older players, like probably under 12s and up. But with your real young kids, it's a great idea to do a warm-up fun game. So again, probably don't send them for laps. It's not that fun. They tend to mess around. They get silly. They might hurt each other. Doing a game is a great way to engage them, and they really enjoy it. Most of the kids will know Octopus, and other games like Chain Chasey, Partner Tag, and Tail Tag are great fun warm-up games for any sport. Just make sure when you do a warm-up game that you don't have any outs, because obviously then the children are not warming up if they're sitting out on the side. If it's like Octopus where they get tagged and they have to be seaweed, then incorporate some type of a rule where they have to move around for that. And also you'll really want to make sure you've got maximum participation for the warm-up. You want the whole group to be moving around for most of the time. After we've done our warm-up part of the session, we would move into our skills. Now I've put skills/game sense activity. 20 years ago when we did phys ed, we used to do things, isolate the skills and just teach them in isolation in what we call a drill. We've moved away from that a lot in phys ed now, and we love to do game sense activity. So a game sense activity might be a modified game that you're focusing on one skill in, but it's incorporating a whole range of other attacking and defending. It might incorporate a bit of fitness. There's a whole range of things that come in that are just without isolating that skill. However, when you're teaching juniors in particular or beginners to sport, it's actually quite good to just do a skill or a drill-based activity. It just allows them to not have all the other things to concentrate on to be able to break the drill down and to teach that skill explicitly. So I will still do skills and a little drill for a particular skill when I'm teaching juniors and beginners to sports. If it's older age group, then game sense is great, obviously, because they already understand the fundamentals and they probably know how to execute the skill. So you want to incorporate it in game sense and practice it under pressure. So it's simulating more what the game is going to be like for them. With juniors, I would split them up. So in football, we have quite large groups of players, split them up probably into 2 or 3 stations and rotate them through. So that can either be a little game sense activity or a skill. So you might have, for example, a group of 20 kids. You split them up into 3 groups. One group's doing a kicking drill and you're teaching them explicitly how to do a drop punt. One group's doing a little activity with, maybe it's a modified 3-on-3 game, so it's a bit of game sense, and you have, again, you pick a key focus for that activity. And then you might have one station that's perhaps a target game where they've got a kick to hit a stick or through a goal, so that way it's you've got 3 different things and you're moving them, engaging them, they're rotating through. I usually do about 8-minute rotations. That works really well, and it's not only a junior structure, it can work really well with senior players as well, splitting them up into smaller groups, because again it goes back to this maximum participation. So we know when our players are engaged and they're moving, that's the best way they're going to learn. So I've said small groups. Obviously you don't want probably groups bigger than about 6 to 8 on those stations, because then we're not providing each player with the maximum amount of time of touching the ball. And I've said 2 to 3 skills max per session. You really don't want to cram more into, especially most of our sessions are an hour and a half long. You're better off only, having 1 or 2 skills, maximum 3, and doing them really well so that the players understand that they're not getting confused. Once you've done your skills section, which will be the bulk, so normally your warm-up will take, in an hour session, your warm-up might be 10 to 15 minutes, including your dynamic stretches. Your skills will be the bulk of the session, so that might be 35 to 40 minutes. And then you want your modified game at the end, 15 to 10 minutes of the last bit of the session. Again, I would try put them into small groups. So quite often I see a lot in junior footy, they just put them in a grid game. There's 20 kids out on the field and there's 1 ball. The problem with that is at training that most of the kids may only get 1 or 2 touches, and you'll have some kids who won't even touch the ball during that modified game section. So what you want to do is break them up into like 3-on-3, 4-on-4, or 5-on-5, and just have like a little round robin competition. And whatever that modified game is, it might be a handball game, a kicking game, you can decide, obviously, depending on, I would try to keep your modified game linked back to your skills. So if you'd just done handballing as a skill, you might do a modified game around handballing. That will really help with engaging your players and them getting the most out of the modified game. If you have time at the end, it's always great to do a review. However, in the everyday world, quite often we don't get time to do that. Players are getting picked up by parents, they have to run off. Even if you can just bring them all in and say, give me a couple of things you learnt tonight, that can really help reinforce those key points that you're trying to teach your players. A couple of tips for running your session. Really, please only use your whistle to stop. Okay, the players are trained in a match to stop on the whistle. So when I see coaches using the whistle to go, it's not reinforcing that when the whistle goes, we want it to stop. It's a really great tool to use with junior players. And if you train them from the very start, every time I blow my whistle, you've got to stop no matter where you are, what you're doing. You'll find that'll work really effectively for your management of the group. Mark out the boundaries with cones. So if you're setting up drills, have it marked out. It's always really good. I've actually got that down here. It's to set up prior to training. So if you can get there 10 to 15 minutes early, set all your things up that you're going to need. That's going to really help with your flow and your transition through each one of those stages of the session. Using coloured cones for a certain activity is great. So if you know you've got 4 groups that need to run out to a cone, it's always really good to make blue to blue, green to green, yellow to yellow. And I find that no matter what the age, even with adults, it's much easier for them to understand the drill if they're running to the same colour cone. A couple of quick ways to split the group. In football, you've got such a large group is, I like to say, partner up. They always partner up with their friends, which can come in handy with the behaviour management. And then you might say, right, one of the partners go get a bib on, and then you split them up into 2 groups like that. It's very quick and easy. Like I say, it helps with behaviour management because usually kids who are friends like to go together, and then they don't realise you're splitting them up into 2 teams. Another one that is really a great way to do it is get them to line up in height order, and every second player steps forward and they go get a bib on. Managing behaviour is really important with your sessions, especially in the junior coaching. Don't be afraid to sit players out. We know that it's usually the training is after school. They're tired. I do a junior session on a Friday night, and it's not ideal for players. They're tired by then, but if they're messing around, A, they're not learning, B, they're potentially not having fun, and C, they could be hurting someone. So I always like to say to my juniors, it is about fun and participation, but if you're not going to listen to me, then you're going to have to go sit out. And usually a warning is enough for them to start listening again. Mentioned that one about setting up prior to training, that really helps. The other one at the end is I like to use 3 whistles at the end, and the players learn that that's pack up and they grab the equipment that's near them. So pack up with a group of 20 players is actually really quick because you just get them to pack up. If you do all that, sorry, I know it's a lot of information, that should really help the planning of your session, and a good plan will help your session run smooth and effectively. Good luck with it. Let me know if you've got any questions, and enjoy your coaching.